This video is to help you with the homework for section 3.1.1. Excuse me. In the methods and meanings, they remind you about the multiplicative identity, which is one of the main concepts of this section. That if any number or expression is multiplied by the number 1, the result is equal to the original number or expression. And we call that multiplicative identity. So we're multiplying by 1, and the number is maintaining its identity. It's equal in value, but looks different. So 2/3 times a giant 1 gives us an equivalent fraction of 4/6. Equal in value, looks different. Okay. So for your homework, we're starting with 312. You're going to copy and complete these giant 1 problems. So for A, in example, you're going to say to yourself, all right, 5/3 times what giant 1 is going to equal a missing number out of 18? First of all, realize that the original number is improper, so your final answer will be improper, and it's okay in this case to leave that as improper because you're looking for an equivalent fraction, not a mixed number. But what you're going to say to yourself is, what do I multiply basically 3 by to give me 18, which of course is 6. And if the denominator of the giant 1 is 6, then the numerator has to be 6 because 6/6 creates that giant 1. So there's our multiplicative identity in that giant 1. And then to find the missing value, we say, all right, 5 times the numerator of 6 would equal the numerator that is missing, 30. So 30/18 we're saying is equivalent to 5/3, and we've found that equivalent fraction by multiplying by a giant 1 of 6/6. So you're doing the same concept here and here. The only difference with B is they're doing the multiplying on the right side of the equation instead of the left, and that's fine. You're still saying to yourself, 4 times what number equals 28? Once you know the numerator, then you'll know the denominator of your giant 1 and can find your missing value. For 313, Rachel says that when she ran 115 yards, she went farther than Beth, who only ran 327 feet. Is she correct? So what you should notice is that one of these is in yards and the other is in feet. So you need to change one to the same notation, the same labeling as the other. So probably the easier one to change is the yards to feet, because to go from a larger unit to a smaller unit means you multiply. Otherwise, if you're going from a smaller to a larger, you're going to divide. And for most students, that's harder. So you're going to take 115 yards, multiply by the fact that there's 3 feet in a yard, and then you'll be converting that to feet, and now can compare to how far Beth went. For 314, you're going to look at the 2 histograms. They're giving you information about the heights of players on 2 basketball teams, the Tigers and the Panthers. And you're going to use these histograms to answer these questions. So what you see is in the Tigers, they have one player from 6'3" to 6'6", tall players obviously, or no, I'm sorry, that's 63 inches, my mistake, 63 inches to 66 inches. And then they have 2 players from 69 inches to 72 inches. They have 5 players from 72 to 75, and so on. Panthers team, they have 1 player from 63 to 66 inches. Looks like 3 players from 66 to 69 inches, and again, continue to read that. So they want to know which team has the taller players and which one has shorter players. So as you kind of compare back and forth, which one has taller players, which one has shorter players, and explain. Then for B, which team has heights that vary more, where there's more difference between their taller players and their shorter players? Which one has more uniformity to that? And then which team had more players that are about the same height? That's your answer for C. For 315, pardon me, you're going to, for A, find the perimeter of the triangle. So you're adding up the side measurements. Don't forget to put a label. B, you're finding the area of this rectangle. Again, remember the label for area is square units. And again, since we're not given a label other than, we're not given centimeters like we were for A, so it would truly be just square units. And then for C, you're going to find the area and perimeter of this. So perimeter's label will be inches, area will be square inches, include the label as well. Then for 316, they want you to write down at least 3 different pairs of numbers that add together to give you 1. So those could be fractions, those could be decimals, You're going for pairs of numbers that'll add up to 1. So one example would be that you could go with, like, it's kind of small print, but you could go with, 9/10 plus 1/10. We know that would add up to equal 1. Oops. And in this case, I wrote this incorrectly, I apologize. 1/10 would be written that way. Okay. You could also go with, I'll make that a little bigger so you can see it, but you could also go with fractions. You could go with 5/10 plus 5/10 in a fractional form. You're going to come up with 3 different pairs. For 317, you're going to use the distributive property to rewrite these and then simplify them. So for like A, you can start by making this into 12 times 300 plus 9. And then you could break that down with the distributive property by making it 12 times 300 plus 12 times 9. Then find the value of 12 times 300, the value of 12 times 9, and add them together. For B, it's kind of already broken apart for you, which is nice. So then you'll just do your distributive property, 8 times 100 plus 8 times 10 plus 8 times 8. Find those individual values and add them up. For 318, if 5 notebooks cost $5.25, how much would 3 notebooks cost? So again, there's more than one way you could do this. One way you could do it is to set it up and say, all right, 5 notebooks are $5.25. And we want to know how much 3 notebooks would be. So notebooks across from notebooks. And I'm just going to go NB there for notebooks. And we want to know that cost. So you could set it up for cross products. Move this over a little bit here. And that would be a good way to do it. All right, you could take your $5.25 times your 3. Again, those are the 2 numbers that you know diagonally. And then you'd be dividing by your third value of 5. Another way you could do it is you could take 525, divide by the fact that there's 5 notebooks, and find out the cost of 1 notebook, and then multiply that by 3. For 319, Jinya takes the bus across town to school each day. Last week he timed his trips and found that the time varies from day to day. So these were the times it took him to get to school. If you had to use one number to tell him how long it took him to get to school, what would you say? So looking at this data, what would seem like a reasonable number that you would use to explain to someone how long it takes them typically to get to school? Then for B, Jinya does not want to be late. If he needs to get to school by 8 a.m. each day, what's the latest he should get on the bus, assuming that one is waiting for him at any given time, to get to school on time? So based on how long it takes him, what would be the latest he could get on the bus and still get to school by 8 a.m.? For 320, they want you to look at this dot pattern. So for figure 1, we have, looks like 2 rows of 2. Figure 2 has 3 rows of 2. Figure 4 has 5 rows of 2. So what would figure 3 look like? What would figure 5 look like? And how many dots would there be in the 50th figure? All right, because 50th figure would probably have 51 rows of 2. And then is there a figure that would have exactly 38 dots? And if so, which one? 321, Stacy exercises 3 days a week by walking around the soccer field near her home. The field is 80 yards wide and 115 yards long. So first you're going to draw a diagram of that. So you're going to start by making your rectangle, labeling in your width and your length. Find out how far she walks in one trip around the field, which is the perimeter. That'll be your answer for A. And then if she walked around the field 4 times every time she exercised, how far does she walk each week? So remember, it's 4 times the perimeter, and she's doing that 3 days a week. Okay. And then you are doing the additional challenge. If a mile is 1,760 yards, how many miles is she walking each week? So once you know for B how far she walked each week, how many miles is that? All right, because this will be in yards, this is in yards, and then you can divide to figure out how many miles she goes. So that is your homework then for 3.1.1. Feel free to email me or talk to me if you have any questions. Thank you.